If you are an organization leader or maybe an economic expert or a European data space professional tuning in today,
Mm.
you are probably, well, you're constantly on the lookout for the next massive strategic advantage.
Right, you're analyzing market trends or optimizing supply chains.
Yeah, or maybe looking into the latest AI integrations. But to find the actual future of the digital economy, we need to take a massive step backward, like way backward.
Mm.
Think about the fundamental biological reality of being a human being. On an individual, purely physical level, we are surprisingly weak.
It is true. I mean, we aren't particularly fast. We certainly aren't incredibly strong compared to other mammals.
No, not at all.
And our senses are relatively dull when you stack them up against other apex predators. Plus, our young are completely helpless for years. Biologically speaking, if you were placing bets a few 100,000 years ago, we should have been an underdog species.
Exactly. We should have been just a footnote in the fossil record, and yet we completely dominate the planet. Why? Because of what is arguably the single greatest invention of humanity. Cooperation.
Cooperation. It's the ultimate survival mechanism. And that concept, humanity's evolutionary reliance on cooperation, is the exact framework we are using for our deep dive today.
It's a fascinating lens to look through.
It really is. Our mission is to take this fundamental anthropological truth and apply it directly to the absolute cutting edge of the modern business world. Specifically, we're looking at the transition into a networked data economy, utilizing the theoretical framework of resource-based theory.
And to ground all of this high-level strategy, we are going to look at the very real business benefits of data intermediation services. We'll be using the Finnish data space Europe's Tritom service as our primary example.
Because the transition we're talking about isn't just theoretical anymore.
No, it is a functional reality right now.
Okay, so let's unpack this, starting with that anthropological baseline. Our evolutionary dominance basically comes down to coordinated cooperation. We're talking about shared hunting, a strict division of labor, and most importantly, the sharing of information.
Yeah. Taking down a woolly mammoth wasn't accomplished by a lone genius with a sharp stick. It was a highly coordinated, community-wide effort.
What's fascinating here is that it extends far beyond just working together in the moment to secure a meal. The real magic is what anthropologists call cumulative culture.
Cumulative culture.
Yeah, as a species, we succeed because we share knowledge across groups. We actively teach each other, and we build upon the compounding work of previous generations. Think about the modern internet.
Or global logistics network.
Exactly, or large language models. These monumental achievements weren't built by solitary actors. They are the direct result of tens of thousands of researchers, engineers, and businesses engaging in what is termed hyper-cooperation.
Which makes total sense historically, but let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
Business is inherently competitive. We are taught that the market is about survival of the fittest, about outmaneuvering the other guy. Isn't this idea of hyper-cooperation a bit, I don't know, idealistic for a modern enterprise? In the business world, especially among micro and SME companies, they still largely act as completely solitary actors.
They hold their cards very close to their chest.
Right.
They do, and that is exactly the vulnerability we're analyzing today. We try to solve incredibly complex market problems completely alone when those same problems could be solved faster, with higher quality, and with significantly less risk if we tackle them together.
So it's a strategic misstep.
A massive one. The overarching strategic argument from our sources is that the future winners of the data economy will not be lone wolves. The true competitive edge belongs to communities and ecosystems that are highly skilled at cooperation.
Sustainable advantage doesn't stem from isolated corporate fortresses.
Exactly. It comes from trust-based networks.
Okay, so if we accept that hyper-cooperation is the goal, how does a modern enterprise actually structure that? How do you operationalize trust in a highly competitive market?
To understand that mechanic, we need to look at resource-based theory, or RBT. If you are an economic expert listening, you're likely already familiar with this.
Yeah, it's a staple in strategic management.
It is. In that academic discipline, there is one central driving question. Why do some companies consistently succeed and outperform others? RBT, which has been a dominant framework for a couple of decades now, answers that question by shifting the executive focus.
Shifting it away from just buying stuff.
Right. It argues that competitive advantage doesn't just come from aggressively acquiring new external resources.
It's not just about who has the biggest budget to buy up startups or raw materials.
Precisely. Success comes from how effectively an organization utilizes the resources and capabilities it already possesses when implementing its strategies. Now, traditionally, a resource is anything an organization controls. Personnel, niche expertise, manufacturing equipment, patents, proprietary data.
And we usually categorize those as strictly internal or external.
We do. But when we transition into an ecosystem model, RBT introduces a third incredibly powerful category, which is communal resources.
Meaning resources that are shared, negotiable, and organized among the various members of an ecosystem.
Exactly. And the ultimate real-world analogy for resource-based theory in action within an ecosystem is actually a military one. It's NATO.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is such a fascinating comparison. Let's break that down. Because NATO is arguably the most overwhelmingly powerful military force on the planet.
Undoubtedly.
Yet, as a distinct organizational entity, NATO possesses practically zero physical resources of its own. It doesn't have a sovereign standing army. It doesn't own vast fleets of submarines or fighter jets directly.
No, its immense deterrent power is derived entirely from the shared communal resources of its member states.
Right.
Those sovereign members are united by a common, overarching goal, a shared governance model, and strictly agreed upon rules of engagement. It is a massive, highly functional, trust-based ecosystem.
I hear the NATO comparison, and the scale of power makes total sense. But military alliances are also famously bureaucratic. They are slow.
They can be, yes.
So if I am a CEO, my competitive advantage often relies on agility. If I join a massive data ecosystem to access these communal resources, am I sacrificing my company's agility? Am I going to get bogged down in endless committee meetings just to launch a new product?
That is a critical concern for any leader. But this is where the digital nature of the data economy fundamentally differs from geopolitical alliances. In a modern data ecosystem, the treaty isn't a political negotiation.
It's code.
Yes, it is predefined technical governance. The rules of engagement are baked into the architecture of the network itself. This allows for frictionless coordination.
So you get the massive scale of NATO's communal resources, but with the rapid execution speed of a tech startup.
Because the trust and the rule sets are automated.
So mapping that onto the data economy. If your organization is actively choosing not to participate in a data ecosystem right now, it is quite literally like trying to survive as a small sovereign nation entirely outside of NATO.
You are completely alone.
You are relying solely on your internal resources and your own isolated perimeter defenses, while your competitors are combining their strengths into an overwhelming communal force.
It is a massive strategic disadvantage. And this brings us to the mechanics of the macroeconomic transition we are seeing right now. We are moving away from the traditional centralized platform economy model and stepping into a truly networked data economy.
Let's talk about the economics of that shift. Traditional platforms often rely on a zero-sum customer acquisition model. You're fighting for market share in a highly saturated space.
Right. If you want to grow your user base, you generally have to cannibalize your competitor's user base. Your growth requires someone else's direct loss.
It's a zero-sum game.
But the network data economy leverages data liquidity to rewrite those rules entirely. When companies decide to cooperate in an ecosystem, they aren't just swapping customers.
They are combining siloed datasets and niche expertise.
Exactly, to create brand new value-added services that neither entity could possibly build alone. Because of this net new value creation, the overall market actually expands.
It triggers Metcalfe's law within the ecosystem. The value of the network grows exponentially with each new participant that brings unique data to the table.
That's spot on. When a third company joins this ecosystem and introduces a new innovation, the total customer base for the entire ecosystem balloons.
So that new company's growth isn't extracted from the original members.
No, their innovation creates a competitive advantage for everyone involved. It shifts the market from a zero-sum battleground into an environment where innovation creates overarching value across the board.
There's a brilliant quote from the sources about this. Ecosystem strategy is creating power. Company strategy is the skill to use that power.
It's the perfect summation. Your individual company strategy is about your skill in leveraging that shared power to generate revenue.
Okay, NATO-level power and exponential market growth sounds fantastic on a whiteboard, but if I'm a business leader listening to this, my immediate burning question is, how do I actually build that without accidentally handing my proprietary trade secrets over to my competitors?
That is the million-dollar question.
Let's bring this down to reality. How do organizations actually execute this?
This is exactly where we need to define the specific technical and legal tools that make this possible. And this brings us to Tritom, the service developed by DataSpace Europe.
And before we go any further, I need to make a highly critical distinction for you, the listener. Tritom is not a platform. I repeat, it is not a platform. It is a data intermediation service, or in the Finnish regulatory context, a data invalidity-palvelu.
That distinction is paramount. It is the linchpin to making this entire hyper-cooperation model work safely for an enterprise.
Why is that?
Because participating in traditional tech platforms often forces a company into a Faustian bargain. To participate and gain the benefits of the platform's reach, you are usually required to surrender control and often visibility of your business-critical data.
You're uploading your trade secrets into a centralized silo owned by someone else.
And once you hand that over, you lose your strategic leverage.
Right. The platform becomes the landlord, and you are just a tenant paying rent with your data.
Precisely. A data intermediation service, or DIS, operates on a completely inverted philosophy. It is designed specifically to give you, the data owner, the technical and legal tools to actively manage your own data rights,
So it allows you to share data securely, selectively, and temporarily.
without ever relinquishing ownership or control.
And there's a massive regulatory tailwind behind this model right now in Europe, specifically with the EU Data Governance Act, the DGA, and the Data Act. But let's not just drop acronyms. For a business leader, what is the actual commercial impact of the DGA here?
The business impact is profound. The DGA essentially mandates strict structural separation for these intermediaries. It legally enforces neutrality.
Meaning they can't play both sides.
Exactly. It means that a recognized data intermediation service cannot legally monetize your data for their own cross-selling, nor can they use your data to develop their own competing products. They are purely a neutral, highly secure pipeline.
And Tritom is built precisely around that legally mandated neutrality. It respects your trade secrets while giving you the technical capability to participate in the broader ecosystem.
That's right.
Let's look at how this plays out in the real world to really visualize the market power this creates. The sources give a perfect, concrete example, which is the Finnish grain and fodder market.
Yes, this scenario perfectly illustrates how asymmetric information creates power and how a data intermediation service dismantles that asymmetry.
It is a classic David and Goliath market dynamic. Let's set the scene. In this agricultural market, commodity prices are heavily influenced by what economists call the information space.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it isn't just about the physical supply of grain in a silo. It is entirely about the narrative surrounding that supply and demand.
And historically, the large grain buyers, the massive food processing corporations, completely control this narrative. They have the megaphone.
They do. They can release a press statement or a market forecast saying, "We project a massive surplus this season. The warehouses are completely full."
Now, whether that statement is objectively true or heavily skewed, that narrative instantly drives the spot price of grain down.
Meanwhile, the individual agricultural entrepreneurs, the farmers, are completely isolated. Because of very strict antitrust and competition laws, individual farmers cannot legally get into a room and share their production yields or storage data directly with each other to compare notes.
Because if they did, it would be considered cartel behavior or price fixing.
Exactly. So they are legally trapped in their own informational silos, completely powerless against the macroeconomic narrative being broadcast by the corporate buyers.
They are the ultimate lone wolves in this scenario. The buyers have massive systemic ecosystem power, and the sellers are totally isolated. So how does a data intermediation service actually disrupt this?
By providing a legally compliant mechanism for hyper-cooperation. By utilizing a service like Tritom, these individual farmers and their regional producer organizations can securely aggregate their digital production data, their harvest yields, and their current storage capacities.
But they are not handing their individual trade secrets over to a centralized tech platform to be exploited.
No, they retain total ownership. But the DIS allows them to pool the insights derived from that data.
Suddenly, the farmers have generated their own NATO-like ecosystem power. When the corporate buyers go to the press and claim the warehouses are full to drive down prices, the producer organizations don't have to just sit there and accept it.
They can counter that narrative. And they aren't countering it with guesses or estimates. They are countering it with aggregated, undeniable, cryptographic, hard data from across their entire network.
So they can step into the information space and definitively state, actually, Based on the real-time aggregated data of our entire cooperative network, the domestic supply is 15% lower than your projections.
It completely flips the power dynamic of the market. The farmers drastically improve their negotiating position because they have eliminated the asymmetric information advantage held by the buyers.
Which leads directly to a sustainable increase in their profitability.
And it gets even more strategic. When farmers control their data at both the individual farm level and the aggregated organizational level, they gain the logistical visibility to optimize exporting their grain directly to international markets.
Oh, wow. So if the domestic buyers are playing hardball, the ecosystem can securely coordinate a massive export shipment instead.
Yes. This further obscures the actual domestic supply from the local buyers, giving the farmers even more leverage. It is a brilliant, aggressive, strategic application of communal data.
It really is. It is resource-based theory, perfectly executed in the real world. But of course, any CEO or CIO listening to this strategy is immediately going to raise a red flag regarding implementation.
Absolutely.
Because this level of data sharing immediately brings up the critical foundational concern, which is security. If I am an organization leader, I might love the idea of ecosystem power, but my business critical data, my IP, my production metrics, that is my lifeblood.
Right. You're not going to take risks with it.
No, I am not going to just plug my ERP system into a new network without absolute proof that it works and that my trade secrets are completely locked down.
That is the most important question to ask, and it is vital to understand how a service like Tritom addresses this on both a practical implementation level and a highly technical cryptographic level.
Let's start with the practical side.
On the practical side, you can't build a trust-based ecosystem overnight. It requires experimentation. Tritom facilitates this through its tiered service structure, specifically Tritom Enterprise and Tritom Essential.
Right, because you don't want to start with a massive multi-million-dollar IT integration project just to see if the ecosystem might work.
Exactly. These tiers provide a secure sandbox, a demo environment. Organizations can securely test new collaborative business models, try out shared service products, and practice the mechanics of working together before they commit to heavy, expensive back-end technical integrations.
So they can validate the market appeal and prove the ROI of the data sharing in a low-risk setting.
It drastically lowers the barrier to entry for hyper-cooperation.
Okay, so we've validated the business model in the sandbox. Now we are ready to actually move the live proprietary data. Talk to me about the cybersecurity architecture, because secure by design is a phrase thrown around a lot in tech marketing. What does it actually mean here?
Let's break down the technical mechanics of that security because it is incredibly robust. When data moves through the Tritom connector, it isn't just sent out into the cloud hoping for the best.
Good to know.
It is encrypted end-to-end using AES 256-bit encryption. Now, AES 256 is military grade. It is functionally unbreakable with current computing power. But the architecture goes a step further. The encryption key used to lock that specific data payload changes every single time a transfer occurs.
Wait, let me stop you there and make sure I understand. So the key used to lock the data isn't a static password. It generates a brand new, unique key for every single file or data stream that is sent.
Precisely. It is a dynamic rotating key.
Nice.
But here is the truly brilliant part. That ever-changing AES key is then itself encrypted.
Encrypted again?
Yes. It is wrapped using the specific intended recipient's RSA public key.
Okay, so the AES key locks the box containing the data, and then the RSA key basically puts a unique, mathematically complex padlock on the AES key itself.
That is a perfect analogy. And the crucial detail is that absolutely no one, not the sender, not an intercepting hacker, not even Tritom as the intermediation service, can unlock that RSA padlock.
So who can?
The only entity in the world that can decrypt the AES key and therefore access the data is the intended recipient using their unique, privately held RSA private key.
That's airtight.
And the service also authenticates the entire transaction via secure API keys, ensuring that every single node connection is cryptographically verified before any data even begins to move.
Which leads to a massive structural strategic advantage for the ecosystem as a whole. Let's play out the worst case scenario.
Okay.
Let's say a highly sophisticated state-sponsored hacker manages to breach the internal IT environment of one single client within this network. They compromise a node. Because of this end-to-end recipient-specific encryption architecture, that hacker is entirely walled off.
Exactly. They cannot use that single compromised node to access the broader ecosystem's communal data pool. They cannot move laterally through the network and siphon off trade secrets from other companies. A localized breach remains strictly localized.
So, by adopting this system, the intermediary doesn't just protect individual data transactions, it actually raises the comprehensive cyber and information security level of the entire ecosystem.
You are genuinely safer operating inside the network than you are trying to defend your own isolated perimeter against modern threats.
It fundamentally changes the risk calculus for enterprise data sharing.
It really does.
This has been an incredibly enlightening breakdown of the mechanics of modern market power. Let's synthesize what we've unpacked today in this deep dive.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We started with the foundational biological reality that human survival and global dominance rely entirely on hypercooperation and cumulative culture.
We then mapped that evolutionary truth onto the modern enterprise landscape using resource-based theory, demonstrating how effectively utilizing communal shared data creates a NATO-level strategic power within business ecosystems.
We explored how traditional platform economies trap organizations in zero-sum battles for market share, while network ecosystems leverage data liquidity and Metcalfe's law to expand the market for everyone.
And finally, we looked at how data intermediation services, specifically designed around European regulatory frameworks like the DGA, make this hyper-cooperation technically possible, highly secure, and legally compliant.
We saw how this empowers previously isolated actors, like our farmers in the agricultural example, to aggregate their insights, counter asymmetric market narratives, and take control of their profitability without ever compromising their vital trade secrets.
It's a complete paradigm shift.
So I want to address you, the listener, directly as we wrap up. Look at your own organization right now. Look at your strategic roadmap for the next 3 to 5 years. Are you operating like an isolated entity, fighting a brutal zero-sum game to steal market share point by point?
Or are you actively building structural power and market resilience by participating in an ecosystem? Are you leveraging the communal resources available to you?
That's the real test.
And that reflection leads us to an important, broader question, and it is the thought we want to leave you with today. We've established that data intermediation services like Tritom give European SMEs the ability to aggregate data and generate the collective market power of massive centralized corporations.
Without having to surrender their IP to those corporations.
Exactly. This raises an important question. If this technology allows federated independent ecosystems to rival the scale and data liquidity of global tech giants, what does that mean for the future of global tech monopolies?
That's heavy.
Are we looking at a fundamental shift in the geopolitical balance of the digital economy? Could this model of secure hyper-cooperation signal the beginning of the end for Silicon Valley's centralized dominance over the European data space?
It's a massive geopolitical question and one that every strategic leader needs to be monitoring closely. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time to uncover your next strategic edge.